The White House isn't just a house, it's a symbol, a place where history is written, decisions that shape the world are made, and yes, where people actually live. But for all of its importance, how much do we really know about what's inside? It's massive, consisting of 132 rooms, 35 bathrooms, 412 doors, and 28 fireplaces. And that's just scratching the surface here. Every room has a story, and every corner has played a part in shaping the history of the United States. From its grand halls to the secretive spaces that few have ever seen, the White House is a living, breathing piece of America's past and present. So, what's it really like inside? How has this iconic residence evolved over more than 2 centuries, and what secrets does it hold? Stay tuned to find out, as today we're having a look at what's inside the White House. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Believe it or not, but before the White House, the President of the U.S. didn't even have a dedicated residence. During George Washington's presidency, he operated out of a temporary executive residence between 2 cities. You see, when Washington took office in 1789, the nation's capital was in New York, where he first lived in the Samuel Osgood House on Cherry Street, the country's first presidential mansion. Later, he moved to a second home on Broadway, and unfortunately, neither of these early presidential residences still exist. With that being said, in 1790, the capital moved to Philadelphia, where Washington and later John Adams stayed in the President's House on Market Street. This residence, leased from the city, provided a stable base, while Washington oversaw the planning of a permanent presidential home in what would later become Washington, D.C. Though the original Philadelphia residence no longer stands, the site is now marked by a memorial that preserves and commemorates this history for visitors. As for other government officials, only a few receive official housing. For example, the Vice President has an official residence at the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, a tradition that began in 1974 to provide a secure and stable living arrangement. However, other high-ranking officials like the Speaker of the House and Chief Justice do not receive official residences and instead arrange private housing in or around the Capitol. But let's not get sidetracked here. The White House itself became the permanent presidential home when John Adams moved in, setting a precedent that every president since has followed, making it both a historic residence and a central hub of American leadership. So, we've established that the story of the White House begins with George Washington, who selected the site for the future presidential residence all the way back in 1791. A year later, the cornerstone was laid, in line with the design of Irish-born architect James Hoban. After 8 years of construction, President John Adams and his wife, Abigail, moved into the still unfinished home. In 1801, Thomas Jefferson moved into the White House, and this marked the beginning of one of the White House's longest-standing traditions. Jefferson would open the White House for public visitation in the mornings, a tradition that was continued by every president since, with the exception of wartime, of course. But it wasn't always easy. In fact, the White House faced its first major crisis during the War of 1812. When British forces set the building on fire, architect James Hoban was called upon to oversee its reconstruction, with President James Monroe eventually moving back into the residence in 1871. Under his direction, the south portico was built, followed by the north in 1829, then under President Andrew Jackson. By the late 1800s, discussions surfaced about expanding the White House further, or even constructing a brand new presidential residence, though none of these ideas took shape. However, in 1902, President Roosevelt led a major renovation, transforming the White House's layout. Roosevelt relocated the president's office from the residence's second floor to a newly created executive office building, which we now know as the West Wing. This redesign was handled by a prominent New York firm and started the momentum of more changes to come. Roosevelt's successor, President William Howard Taft, expanded the office spaces even further, adding the Oval Office to the West Wing. But part of Roosevelt's renovation also included transforming the former president's office into a family living quarter due to his 6 children, as well as their exotic pets, which, according to some sources, included raccoons, snakes, a bear, and a badger. But I'd like for you guys to fact check me on that one in the comment section below. Just 50 years later, the building again needed serious structural repairs. President Harry S. Truman began an extensive renovation, dismantling everything but the outer walls. Overseen by architect Lorenzo Winslow, the reconstruction was completed in 1952, and the Truman family moved back into the White House. With the Truman renovation complete, the White House stood stronger than ever, ready to serve not only as a home for the president, but as a hub of power, diplomacy, and tradition. So I bet you're wondering, what does the White House look like inside today? Well, to answer that question, let's go ahead and take a tour. Our tour of the White House starts in the West Wing, on the ground floor with the Navy Mess Hall. Let me explain. Since 1880, Navy stewards have provided food service in the White House, although the current version of the Navy Mess Hall was established in 1951. The next room, the Situation Room, is one of the most important rooms in the building. It was established in 1961, as requested by Kennedy in response to the Bay of Pigs. It's here that intelligence information is fed directly to the White House through the Situation Room, which I might add is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no exceptions. Moving on to the first floor, we have the West Colonnade, also known as the 45-second commute. This is an open columned pathway built for the president and his staff to travel between the West Wing and the executive residence. Now, outside of the residence, we have the Rose Garden and the South Lawn. The Rose Garden was created all the way back in 1913, but redesigned during Kennedy's presidency to be a reception area. The South Lawn is the site of Marine One arrivals and departures, as well as a tennis court, putting green, and a kitchen garden. Another one of the White House's most important rooms is the Cabinet Room. The Cabinet Room is for meetings between the president and their cabinet, members of Congress, the National Security Council, and foreign heads of state. The president sits at the center of the table along with the cabinet secretaries from the oldest departments. Presidents also select portraits of other presidents to put in the Cabinet Room. This is meant to be a reflection of their inspiration as well as governing style. Next, we have the Oval Office, which is the president's primary place of work. But the most famous feature of the Oval Office is a desk made from timbers of the HMS Resolute, an extremely historic British naval ship. Next, we have the Roosevelt Room, which is located where Theodore Roosevelt's old office was and is named after both Theodore and Franklin D. Roosevelt for their contributions to the West Wing of the White House. This room contains the first Nobel Peace Prize awarded to an American. It was awarded to Theodore Roosevelt for mediating the peace settlement in the Russo-Japanese War. Up next, we have the West Wing Reception Room. This room is a space for visitors to the president, vice president, and White House staff. The room is decorated with a 19th century clock, a mahogany bookcase made in 1770, which is one of the oldest pieces of furniture in the White House, not to mention a recreation of that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. Interestingly, the painting of Washington crossing the Delaware has multiple inaccuracies, including the depiction of the American flag, which was designed over a year after this historic event took place. The final room of the West Wing is, of course, the James S. Brady Press Briefing Room. The Press Briefing Room was created due to growing needs to accommodate the press. It was constructed in 1970. On top of what was formerly a pool. In 2000, the room was named after Press Secretary James Brady, who was shot and disabled during an assassination attempt on Reagan. Now let's move on to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, which is located next to the West Wing and is home to the majority of offices of White House staff. It was originally built for the Navy, State, and War Departments, but now houses various agencies such as the National Security Council, the Office of the Vice President, as well as the Office of Management and Budget. The first of the rooms here is the Vice President's Ceremonial Office. This space was originally used as the Secretary of Navy's office between 1879 and 1923. From 1923 to 1947, General John Pershing took over the office, being the longest occupant of that office. However, in 1960, it became the Vice President's office, and the desk is part of the White House collection and is said to be signed by several vice presidents as well as presidents. Next up, we have the Secretary of War Suite, which consists of 10 total rooms. Like the name suggests, it's a suite for the Secretary of War, and much was decided here. You see, all plans of defense for the United States between 1888 and 1939 were made in this very room. Now let's have a look at the main residence. This part of the structure has 4 floors as well as a basement. The basement consists of storage rooms, laundry and mechanical rooms, as well as multiple bathrooms. The ground floor here contains the center hall, which connects all the rooms on the floor, one of which is the Vermeil room, which contains gilded tableware. The room also contains portraits of several first ladies. At one point, this was a staff room, but was later used for polishing silver, before eventually becoming a social room during the renovation led by Theodore Roosevelt. By 1956, it came to its current purpose when Margaret Thompson Biddle left her collection of tableware as a gift to the White House. Perhaps somewhat befitting, adjacent to this room is the China Room, which stores the White House's collection of state china. In fact, almost every administration has their own collection of china in their own individual styles. The room is primarily used by the First Lady for meetings, tea, and small receptions. Now, let's move on to the back center of the ground floor, where we'll find the Diplomatic Reception Room. The Diplomatic Reception Room is used as an entrance from the South Lawn for foreign ambassadors, but is also used as the entrance for the state arrival ceremony. And it probably makes sense that the Map Room is located next to the Diplomatic Reception Room, named after its former use as a situation room during World War II. The room was initially created back during Roosevelt's renovation of the White House. The Map Room was used once again during the Cold War, as Henry Kissinger and Anatoly Dobrynin would meet in the room to deal with the nuclear crisis. Beyond the Map Room, you can find the doctor's offices, as well as the housekeeper's office. Now, on the opposite side of the ground floor, you'll find the White House's library, which served as a laundry room during John Adams' presidency, and adjacent to the library is the Office of the Curator. This office was created in 1961 and serves an interesting purpose. The curator basically needs to work at a forensic level to establish the true story of any item, which may sound simple, but the White House is full of old and significant furniture. And since this furniture has been renovated so many times and in so many different styles, it's extremely difficult to establish any item's true story. Anyhow, the final rooms on this floor are for the Secret Service, kitchen, flower shop, carpenter shop, and a bowling alley. Moving on to the next floor, we come upon a cross hall which connects all rooms and is known to have portraits of all the presidents, from Washington to Lincoln. On the east end of the first floor is the East Room, which is the largest room in the executive residence. This room is used for dances, banquets, concerts, receptions, and press conferences, and was one of the last rooms to be finished and decorated. In the back center are the green, red, and blue rooms. Last is the East Wing. The East Wing has 2 floors and is the smallest section of the White House. The second floor is for the First Lady and her staff, and although this area was designed during the Theodore Roosevelt renovation, it was built in 1942, mainly to cover the construction of the bunker, known as the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. But the East Wing also houses the office of the White House Social Secretary, who plans events at the White House. But there's also the Graphics and Calligraphy Office, which makes the official White House postcards, letters, and military commissions. The East Wing also contains a garden room and the White House's visitor's office, which is responsible for White House tours and other public events. Adjacent to the East Colonnade is the Family Theater. Although it's mostly used to watch movies, presidents also use the space to practice speeches. So as you can see, the White House is far more than just a home for the president. It's a dynamic, living symbol of American leadership and history, with rooms and spaces that tell countless stories about the country's past. So, what part of the White House's history or design surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments section below. Otherwise, I hope you'll consider supporting the channel by clicking subscribe. As always, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.